Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a story that I think you're going to find really fascinating.
Yeah, this one's really interesting.
It's one of those kind of unsolved mysteries from the Bible.
Yeah.
We're talking about this story of the woman caught in adultery, and she's brought before Jesus, and all of her accusers are there. And, this story, they want to stone her according to the law.
Right.
But Jesus kind of throws a wrench in the whole thing when he bends down and starts writing in the dust.
Yeah, whatever.
And that is the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, the Bible doesn't tell us.
It doesn't. And it's like this huge question mark hanging over the whole scene, and people have been speculating about it for centuries, so we're going to try to take a crack at it today.
Absolutely.
The source that we're looking at is a YouTube video from the channel Misterios Divinos. It translates to Divine Mysteries.
Okay.
And this video claims to reveal what Jesus actually wrote in the dust and why it caused the accusers to back down.
Ooh, that's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim, so we'll see if they can back it up.
Right.
But their argument kind of hinges on this idea of really closely reading Scripture.
Okay.
They say that every action that Jesus took, must have a deeper meaning. It's like a message woven into the story.
I mean, I can appreciate that approach, right? It's like we should look beyond just the surface level of the text and see if there's a deeper symbolic meaning.
Exactly. Yeah, like there's got to be a reason why he's writing in the dust. Right. It's not just some random action.
Right.
So to understand their argument, you kind of have to remember who the Pharisees and scribes were. These guys were like the experts in Jewish law and Scripture.
They knew their stuff.
They knew it inside and out. Yeah. So whatever Jesus wrote, it must have resonated with their deep knowledge of Scripture.
Yeah. Otherwise, why would they be so bothered by it?
Exactly. And that's the video's point. Now, here's where things get really interesting. The video connects this scene to something that happened just before this whole encounter. Do you remember when Jesus was speaking in the temple and he's offering living water to those who believe? Okay, so they point to this verse in Jeremiah 17:13 that says, "Those who forsake God will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water."
Okay, so they're drawing a parallel between the living water and the act of writing in the dust.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a pretty fascinating connection.
I mean, it's intriguing for sure.
So then it comes to this really dramatic conclusion. They say that what Jesus wrote in the dust were the names of the accusers.
Wow.
Yeah, like he's directly calling out their hypocrisy and reminding them of their own failings. And according to the video, this is what makes them walk away.
So what do you think, does their interpretation hold water?
Well, it's a really creative interpretation,
Yeah.
but I got to say, it does feel a little speculative to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very creative take, but I feel like there might be a few leaps there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to remember that the Bible uses a lot of symbolism and metaphor,
Really?
right? It's not always meant to be taken literally, so it can be tempting to try to, fill in those blanks and solve the mystery.
Right.
But sometimes the unanswered questions are actually just as powerful as the answers.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can get so caught up in the detective work
Right.
that we kind of miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. And I think in this case, focusing so much on what was actually written in the dust, it might actually distract us from what the passage is really all about.
Okay, so what is the passage really about then? If it's not about figuring out those specific words.
Well, to me, the core message here is really about forgiveness and grace and challenging this kind of legalistic judgment that the Pharisees are so focused on.
Okay, so what do you mean by legalistic judgment?
Well, I think the Pharisees are so obsessed with the letter of the law on the woman's sin that they've completely lost sight of the spirit of the law, which is really all about compassion and mercy.
So you're saying they're more concerned with being right than with actually understanding her situation.
Exactly. They're not offering her any grace whatsoever.
And Jesus is basically calling them out on that.
That's right. He totally disrupts their way of thinking. And remember that line, let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Right.
He's not saying that adultery is okay, but he's not condemning the woman outright either.
Yeah.
He's really making them confront their own hypocrisy.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up a mirror to them saying, hey, before you judge her, maybe take a look at yourselves.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that message is just as relevant today as it was back then.
Right.
We all have this tendency to judge others, right? We focus on their flaws and their mistakes. But this story reminds us to, look inward.
Yeah.
To practice some empathy before we go casting stones.
So if the specific words in the dust aren't really the key to understanding the story,
right?
What are some other ways to interpret this passage?
Well, some scholars think that Jesus might have been writing out some relevant laws from the Old Testament,
Okay.
specifically laws that would address the accuser's hypocrisy.
Oh, interesting.
So, for instance, there were laws about adultery applying to both men and women, but often it was only the woman who was punished.
Right.
So maybe Jesus was calling them out on that, like their selective application of the law.
Huh. That's an interesting theory.
And if you think about it, there's even symbolism in writing those laws in the dust.
How so?
Well, dust is temporary, right? It's fleeting. It gets blown away by the wind. So in a way, it represents the impermanence of human judgment.
Okay, so you're saying like our judgments of other people are ultimately as fleeting as the dust compared to like the eternal law of God.
Right. Which is based on love and forgiveness.
That's a pretty powerful visual.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, okay, you want to talk about the law? Let's talk about the law, but let's do it through like this lens of compassion,
Exactly. And remember, it says in the text that the accusers were convicted by their own conscience.
Right.
So clearly, whatever Jesus wrote, it touched a nerve.
Yeah.
It made them think about their own actions and like why they were really there.
It's like their own guilt was kind of exposed no matter what the specific words were.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us back to the video's interpretation.
Okay.
It's an interesting theory, but we can't say for sure, definitively that he wrote their names.
Right.
But the point they're making about confronting our own like dust, those hidden failings that we all have.
Yeah.
That's something that's definitely worth thinking about.
So even if we don't know exactly what was written, like the act itself is symbolic.
Absolutely.
The deeper truths.
Yes.
That we all have things we need to confront within ourselves.
That's right. And that message really resonates with so many other things that Jesus taught about humility, forgiveness, self-reflection. It's not about pointing fingers at other people. It's about, looking at your own heart.
Right.
And trying to live with more integrity and compassion.
Man, this has been a really cool deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of this story.
It's amazing how much depth there is in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
It's not just some rule book or historical account.
Right.
It's full of this like profound wisdom and insight that still speaks to us today.
I've always loved this story, but I got to admit, I always kind of skimmed over that part about Jesus writing in the dust.
Yeah, it's easy to do that.
I never really thought about what it meant.
Especially with these familiar passages.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like those small details that hold the most meaning.
Yeah, this deep dive has definitely made me want to pay more attention to those details.
Right.
To like dig a little deeper.
That's what's so cool about studying the Bible.
Yeah.
There's always something new to discover.
Yeah, and to challenge us. Well, you've definitely challenged me today. I don't think I'll ever read this story the same way again.
Me neither.
So, to our listener, we want to leave you with this question. The video we talked about today claims that Jesus wrote the names of his accusers in the dust. But what if you were standing there in that moment? What name might Jesus have written for you? What dust do you need to confront in your own life?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think it's worth asking.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new, and we'll see you next time.